Now, I think everyone has met everyone before. Is that correct? Except who have we got? Michael Hartley. Hi.
Hello.
Yeah. Welcome. Sorry, you're. Do you want to introduce yourself? Sorry.
My name's Michael Hartney. I'm the scheme member representative on the pensions board, and at the last meeting, we were invited to attend this meeting of the pensions committee.
Oh, great! Yeah, well, you're really welcome. It is really nice to see some people from the board. Welcome.
Thank you.
And we've got Mario. Who's Mario? Mario.
I think Mario is the ICT guy.
Oh, brilliant. Well, the most important person here tonight then. Okay.
Yeah, he's the one taking care of us. If you have any technical issues, then you can talk to him.
Welcome. Right, to save time, I won't go around with a complete round of introductions, but I would ask that when anyone speaks for the first time, officer or member. Oh, Catherine Pierce. Sorry.
Hello. Yeah, I think quite a few of you have met me before. I have popped up at the odd committee meeting before, but yeah, I'm one of the Aon Benefits and Governance Advisors supporting Karen. So I'm here today particularly to do the initial bit of training on the exit cap.
Oh, brilliant. Well, we'll take care of that. And can I say to everybody else, members and officers, if you could just introduce yourself when you speak for the first time, then so people know who they are. So I'm Councillor Rob Chapman, I'm Chair of the committee. Okay, if we can begin, Rabia, is that okay?
Yes.
And then apologies.
The Chair has received no apologies.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any declarations of interest from members that we haven't? Well, declarations of interest. I see no one indicating, so I'm taking that as a negative. Can we look at the minutes of the previous meeting? The exempt one we'll consider at the end when we do the exempt business. The meeting of 30th of September. Are people happy with that as a record? I won't go through it page by page.
Agreed.
Yeah, okay, it's agreed. Sorry, someone saying something?
Was agreeing.
Oh, you've agreed. Excellent, brilliant. Agreed. So the first item is training about the 95,000 exit cap. Who's going to do that? Catherine, by the sounds of it.
Yeah. So hello everyone. Thanks for having me at your meeting today and giving me the time to give you a bit of an update on this. I'm now attempt to share my screen to share some slides with you. So just bear with me a moment while I just try and work out which one I want to share.
Sorry, Chair. Councillor Ayos said that his link is not working, so he can't access the meeting.
I'm here now. He's just in now.
Yeah. Okay then.
Welcome, Ben. You haven't missed anything yet. Okay, so we're waiting. You're going to put something up on the screen, are you?
I'm trying, but I keep getting a message saying I must grant permissions in order to screen share, and I'm not quite sure how I do that.
Sounds like a job for Mario.
Yeah, Mario, do you know how I would grant permissions to screen share?
Are you using a Mac by any chance, Catherine?
No.
No? Okay. Are you using Google Chrome as a web browser?
Firefox.
Firefox. Okay. So in the top left of your screen, where it says meet.google.com in your web address bar, should be a small padlock.
Yeah.
If you click that padlock, from there you can customize your permissions.
Right. Okay. So let's try it again. Sorry about this, everyone. Just trying to get it to bring up the right.
It's the way of the world these days, isn't it? You know.
Okay. Is everyone able to see the slides?
Yes, I can now. Just coming up. Thank you very much. Yep, brilliant.
Yeah, that's fine.
Great.
Excellent. Okay. Right. I now can't see any of you, I'm afraid. I can literally only see my slides. So I'm afraid if anyone's got a question, you are just going to have to shout because I won't see anyone raising hands or anything. But please do feel free to interrupt me as I'm going along with this. So the aim of this short training session is really just to update you on a current hot topic. I'm sure a lot of you have heard of this already, but this is in relation to the 95k exit cap. And broadly, this is the government's drive to reduce exit payments from the public sector when people leave employment from public sector employments. So it's not an issue just for the LGPS, but there are reasons why it's more of a problem for the LGPS, which I will explain as we go along. So why are we telling you about this? It's an important thing for the committee to be aware of because it is a big problem at the moment for administering authorities. We want to clarify the role of the administering authority versus the role of the employer. Obviously, Hackney Council has responsibilities on both sides, but they are quite different, and it's not always clear where those responsibilities lie at the moment. These changes are quite complex, so there is quite a big impact on both the Hackney Pension Fund team, so Michael and Lucy's team, but also the administrators at Equinity. And there are also potentially decisions that may need to be made by committee about how pensions are dealt with in the current period, and that will become clear as I go through this session. So quickly, a quick agenda for this session. Firstly, I'll go through the regulatory timetable. I'll then talk about the implementation of how the exit cap will be applied. And then I'll go on to talk about further wider reforms that are coming up or proposed that will also have an impact on this. So this slide shows the timeline. The government's first started talking about introducing the exit cap right back in 2015, and the enabling legislation, the Small Business Enterprise and Employment Act 2015 was put into place at that point. That legislation allowed for the cap to be introduced at some point in the future, but it didn't actually become effective then. Things then did go a bit quiet on this. Every so often someone from the government would pop up and say, yes, we're still looking at this, it hasn't gone away, but nothing really happened for a long time. But then in 2019, the government issued a consultation on draft regulations, and this was a consultation from Treasury for the overall regulations for the whole public sector. These weren't specific LGPS related regulations. So that consultation happened, and lots of public sector bodies, including pension funds, responded. Again, it went a little bit quiet, and the government finally responded to that consultation in July 2020. Basically, not a lot had changed from their original consultation. They made a couple of tweaks, but generally they said they were going to push ahead with the exit cap as they'd originally envisaged in their 2019 consultation. And that led to the Treasury releasing their regulations in November 2020, which brought in the exit cap, which basically means that no public sector employer that's listed in those regulations can pay exit payments which come to more than 95,000. So exit payments are pretty much the sort of payments you would expect. So redundancy payments, additional compensation payments, something in lieu of notice and things like that. There are exemptions, so ill health payments in respect of ill health and death in service are exempt from this cap. The key thing that causes problems for the LGPS and therefore local authority employers is that one of the payments included in the cap is the pension strain cost that has to be paid when a pension is paid early. So the LGPS regulations at the moment require that if anyone's made redundant over the age of 55, they get immediate entitlement to their pension. That pension is not reduce payment, so the employer has to make a payment into the pension fund for that pension to be made early. And those pension strain costs, as they're called, count towards the 95k cap. So the cap generally is not a massive issue for some of the other public sector employers and schemes, but obviously you can see that for the LGPS, it can be relatively easy for someone with quite long service to, once you add on their redundancy payments and so on, with the pension strain cost as well, it can be relatively easy to bridge the 95k. So that in itself is an issue that, you know, LGPS and local authority employers did more than other areas of the public sector because of this, because of course the other public sector schemes aren't funded, so don't have the same issue with pension strain payments. However, there's a bigger problem, which is the clash of regulations, because the original intention was that the LGPS would amend its regulations at the same time as Treasury introduced the overall exit cap. Unfortunately, that hasn't happened. So we're now in a position where the Treasury regulations are effective, but the local government pension scheme regulations have not yet been amended. So we have this sort of limbo situation where, on the one hand, the Treasury regulations say you cannot pay exit payments that come to more than 95k. On the other hand, you have the LGPS regulations that say you must pay someone being made redundant who's over 55 their pension. And if that pension requires a strain cost that, when added together with all the other payments, will come to over 95k, you can see that there's a problem here, that the two sets of regulations clash. This is what funds are now battling with, this period where the legislation isn't aligned. Government have issued a letter, so MHCLG have issued a letter saying that they believe that the Treasury regulations have this what they call implied repeal, which means they effectively override what the LGPS regulations say. So MHCLG therefore believe that it's possible for fund pay reduced pensions, which effectively goes against the LGPS regulations. The Local Government Scheme Advisory Board has commissioned legal advice, and this legal advice disagrees with MHCLG's view. This legal advice does not agree that implied repeal applies here. So again, this conflict of advice and guidance leaves local authority employers and funds in a bit of a difficult position. Just a quick update then on the legislative timeline, and then I'll go in, come on and just explain where we are at the moment and what that really means for funds and potentially what the Hackney Fund will need to decide. The Treasury legislation, which is called the Restriction of Public Sector Exit Payments Regulations 2020, came into force from November the 4th in 2020. The MHLG released a consultation about changes to the LGPS compensation regulations. That consultation on the policy closed on November the 9th. They also issued some draft regulations, and the consultation on those closed on December the 18th. And the aim of those regulations is to effectively bring the LGPS regulations in line with the overriding Treasury regulations. So once those regulations come in, funds will have it will be much clearer to funds what they can and can't do. But until those regulations come in, we are in this bit of a limbo period. So we are now, as I said, the Treasury regulations restrict exit payments to 95k. However, the LGPS regulations require a full pension to be paid, and that has associated strain costs. There's the issue as well that pension strain costs can differ between funds, because the LGPS regulations at the moment just require funds to use factors generated by their actuary. There are 4 actuarial firms working across the LGPS, and even those actuarial firms will have different factors for different funds depending on that fund's experience. So you could theoretically have 2 otherwise identical members where in one fund they breach the cap because the strain cost has been calculated higher than it might be in another fund. In future, that will be solved by using Government Actuary Department factors. Those draft factors have been circulated, so there is a decision to be made as to whether funds should use those factors now. And I believe that the Hackney Fund, Michael, do please correct me if I've got this wrong, but I believe the Hackney Fund has been advised by Hymans that it will be okay to use the GAD factors now should any cases arise.
That's correct, yeah.
There's also the other complication that the exit cap doesn't apply to all employers. It is only a public sector exit cap. And you're obviously aware that with admitted bodies, there are a lot of employers in the fund that aren't actually public sector. The exit cap does not apply to any of them. So currently, the fund has a situation where they have to assess, firstly, whether when the fund is approached for redundancy situations, the fund has to assess, is this employer affected by the cap? That's actually down to the employer to tell the fund, but the fund needs to be clear on whether it's a capped employer or not. The fund basically has to decision to make if the cap is exceeded in consultation with the employer, because obviously the fund won't necessarily know about redundancy payments. But the fund has a decision to make, should any cases arise, as to what pension to pay. There is something on this in your quarterly update report, which we'll be talking about later. So this is just giving you the background for when you get to that bit of the report. So there is potentially a decision for the fund to make on that. So that's where where everyone is at the moment. We're in this sort of limbo position. You won't be surprised to hear that there have been quite a few legal challenges on this. There are legal challenges over the exit cap in general, but then there are also challenges relating to this particular issue that local authorities find themselves in. And we also expect to see further legal challenges from individuals who believe they're not being given what they're entitled to. Unfortunately, for any people being made redundant now where their benefits exceed the cap, it's impossible for employers and funds to pay what the regulations require, because you've either got to pay what one set of regulations require, which then breaches another set, or vice versa. So it's up to funds and employers to determine what they're going to pay to members, and the Scheme Advisory Board has given some advice on that. But we do expect there to be a lot of challenges from members, who haven't been awarded what they feel they should be. Until those legal challenges are ironed out, there is a lot of uncertainty for funds and employers. We have heard that there are about 5 union challenges going on at the moment and a judicial review. And we've heard that those have been granted permission to go ahead with their challenges. So it's expected that those are going to be heard probably in March. And we believe, although it's not yet been confirmed, that it's likely the MHCLG regulations that will amend the LGPS won't be issued until after these legal challenges have gone through. That effectively means that we will be in this limbo period probably for another couple of months. It's already been limbo for a couple of months already, and it's likely to continue for another couple of months. And this also possibly causes issues because it will encompass the end of the financial year. So I think we're aware that some employers, not necessarily in Hackney, but across the LGPS world as a whole, have delayed redundancies, hoping to get some clarity. But of course, some of these won't be able to be delayed past the financial year, so decisions will have to be made. I'm going to move on to talk about the changes that MHCLG propose in their forthcoming regulations. But has anyone got any questions on what I've talked about so far?
Chair, I had a question, if I could.
Yes, please. So do I.
Yeah.
Catherine, thanks for that. I'm still just slightly unclear as to why local government has an issue with the strain cost for over 55s being made redundant, but say the NHS or other public sector bodies don't find themselves in the same position.
Yeah, it's because the local government scheme is funded and the other schemes aren't. So because the LGPS is funded, the actuaries, when they're doing the valuation and so on, they obviously make assumptions about when everyone's going to retire. And those assumptions are broadly that people will retire at their normal retirement age. So if people are taking pensions at, say, 55, that's a lot earlier than the actuaries expected. And the fact normally those, if someone was retiring voluntarily, those pensions would be reduced to take account of that difference in cost. Under the current LGPS regulations, those can't be paid unreduced. They have to be paid in full. So the employer has to pay some money into the fund to fund the cost of those benefits being paid early. Because schemes like the NHS aren't funded in the same way, you don't have that same issue of having to make up the difference.
That's interesting. Cam, can I just say the best way to indicate you want to speak is to put your hand up in the raise hand in the app itself, and then I can see the list there. But I'll try and pick up other ways as well. Anyway, and could I remind you, just the first time you speak, just to introduce yourself and your role. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Cam Adams, Councillor Cam Adams, member.
Hi, Cam.
I just want to clarify, how is the strain cost calculated, and again, will the exit cap be indexed?
Okay. To be honest, it's an actuarial calculation, so I'm probably not the best person to advise, but it effectively works out the difference between the pension that would be paid at the normal retirement age and the pension that's being paid now, and works out what is needed to be added into the fund to take account of that difference. But I suspect the actuary is probably better placed to answer that question than me.
And my second question is, will the exit cap be indexed?
That's a good question, and it's one that's been raised quite often in the consultation processes over the last few years. There are no current plans, it's not legislation for that cap to be indexed, but obviously it's a very valid point that lots of people have raised. And in fact, you know, the 95k figure was originally proposed in 2015. We're already, 6 years past that, and they're still using the same figure. But yeah, it's no, but definitely something that has been raised and talked about before.
Thank you.
Is there anything else at the moment, or shall I carry on with my next bit?
Yes, please.
Can I just say, I don't see any questions at the moment, but can I just say to Michael,
yes,
we've got 3 Michaels. Michael Hartney, do feel free to participate as you know, if you've got any questions or comments, you're very welcome to participate. Henry, did you want to come in at this stage?
Yes, please. Thank you. I'm Henry Coulter. So I'm one of the the employer representative. I'm just trying to understand how this might work in practice, but we've obviously got a number of schools, and in this case, Hackney is the administrator of the pension. I don't think we've got anybody who's going to come into this category, but just if, for example, somebody has an entitlement, say, of £120,000 combined pension and payoff, how does that work? Because if we're stuck with this 95,000 overall, whether a mixture of pension payment or redundancy plus other things, what happens to that surplus, and who's liable? I mean, where does the ex-employee go? Because he's going to get, or he or she's going to get 95,000 and should have an entitlement for obviously something over the top. So what happens?
Yeah, so this is where I was saying that we're likely to see lots of challenges from members, because effectively in those situations the member cannot be paid everything that they're theoretically entitled to under the regulations. So it's likely the Scheme Advisory Board has advised funds basically to offer unreduced pensions, or to offer the member the option of a deferred pension instead, which would be payable then from their normal retirement age. Obviously the member is not going to be happy with that, because the regulations do say unreduced pension, but unfortunately this is the problem we have, that you've got these regulations that say different things that
Okay,
just can't be reconciled. So,
and so if we as employer then ensure that they only get that 95,000, who's
it's quite tricky, because if
Yeah.
the fund needs to make its decision about whether it's going to pay full pensions or not, and then the employer makes its decisions about what it's paying.
Okay.
So in terms of redundancy payments and so on, and it's quite likely that once the legal challenges have worked their way through and some sort of clarity is achieved, that one or both sides will then need to revisit exits and work out what the correct amounts to pay to members are. So it's basically the scheme advisory board at the moment is pay as little as you can at the moment, and then, because it's better not to pay something and have to reclaim it from a member if it turns out to be incorrect.
I got you.
And then it will be sorted out once there's legal clarity over exactly what can be paid.
No, I get that. So in practice, if we do hit the situation, we as an external employer probably need to work in conjunction with Hackney as pension administrator and hopefully come up with some sort of solution.
Yeah, there will need to be a lot of liaison between the fund and employers, because both sides need to know what the other side's doing effectively.
Yeah, okay, got you. Thank you.
Okay, shall we move on?
Yep.
Catherine?
Yep, that's absolutely fine. Okay, so I've talked about where at the moment. As I said, the MHCLG have proposed legislation that will amend the LGPS regulations. Once these come into force, it will achieve the clarity that I've been saying isn't there at the moment. However, there will be further impacts. So at the moment, if someone isn't affected if all their benefits come under the 95k cap, it's not a problem and everyone can just carry on as normal. But once these amended regulations come in, I should just clarify that what I've written here is based on the regulations that were out for consultation. It is obviously possible that these might change once they actually come in, but this is broadly what the intention is. So the intention is that everyone, even if they don't exceed the 95k cap, will see a reduction to what they would previously have been entitled to. So once the LGPS regulations come in, if they come in as they will, the pension strain cost when added to other benefits can't exceed the cap. That's the same as it is now. But the strain cost will be further reduced by any statutory redundancy payment the member is going to receive, even if they're nowhere near the 95k cap. So you can see immediately that people are going to be receiving lower pensions than perhaps under the previous regulations. The member will have options to make up that difference in strain cost, or they can just take a reduced pension. So they could take a pension reduced just for the difference in strain cost, or they can take a fully reduced pension. There's also limits to the amount of discretionary compensation that can be paid. If any strain cost is being paid, then no discretionary compensation can be paid. So effectively, the member's got some decisions to make about what combination of benefits they're going to take. So again, this is going to need lots of liaison between the fund and employers to make sure that the members are given the right options and that everyone knows what options the member wants to make sure the right things are paid. So it is going to get quite complicated once these regulations come in. So people will be, in general, worse off than under previous redundancy arrangements, and there'll be a lot more correspondence needed to make sure they understand their options. As I mentioned earlier, the Government Actuaries Department has published new national factors for strain costs. Once the MHCLG regulations come into force, those Government Actuary Department factors will come into force. But as we've already discussed, Hackney have been advised by Hymans that it's okay to start using those factors now. And this will avoid the potential issue of Hackney valuing pension strain cost in a different way to other funds. But from the date these regulations come into force, whenever that may be, those factors will become compulsory. But there will still be some discretion to use fund-specific factors for employers that aren't affected by the cap, because Again, these MHCLG changes are only proposed to apply to public sector employers. So again, it's going to be down to the fund to make sure that they know whether employers are capped or not in terms of their approach. As well as the pension implications, there are also some other wider reforms. So if you look at the right hand side of this slide, where it's got the bits about employer lump sum compensation and then the 3 bullet points, these are the proposals to actually limit the redundancy payments that employers can make. So currently there's no limit per year of service. That's going to become a maximum of 3 weeks pay. Currently there's a maximum of 104 weeks pay. That will go down to 66. And they're also capping the minimum salary that could be used in redundancy payment calculations. There's currently no limit, and that's going to be capped at 80k, again, assuming the regulations come in as proposed. So you can see from that there, as well as the pension implications, people in general will, going forward, be potentially receiving lower redundancy payments than under previous, although it does obviously depend on individual employers and their individual policies as to what they pay. It's just worth noting as well that it has been talked about to bring in clawback of exit payments if someone leaves the public sector and then returns within a year. And that's returning to any part of the public sector. It doesn't have to be the same part. So someone could be made redundant from local government, have their exit package, and then if, say, in 6 months they went to work for the NHS, they would have to pay back some of their exit package. That hasn't happened yet, and it's not in these proposed regulations, but the government have said that is still on the table, so that's possibly something that could pop up again in the future. So that's just something to be aware of. Just to draw your attention, if you do want a bit of further information, that link at the bottom is really helpful. That's the Local Government Association page where they've sort of pulled the information they've been issuing, including the legal advice that I made reference to earlier. This is my final slide, just to wrap up some of the other complications. Most of these I've already mentioned, but just to make you aware, there is a process where council, if they wish, can waive the cap in certain circumstances. If it was determined that that would apply, that would actually have to be signed off by full council, and then a business case put to Treasury and signed off by them. So you can see from that waiving the cap is not an easy process. I've mentioned already about the Scheme Advisory Board advice and the legal challenges that are going on at the moment. And then at the bottom, I've just highlighted some of the other issues about making sure that systems are up to date to cope with all these calculations, or that manual overrides are in place. And the communications, obviously, to the employee are going to be key, and making sure that both the fund side and the employer side are clear on who's doing what. There's also potentially funding issues if unreduced pensions are paid, but the strain costs can't be paid over to the fund. That will only be an issue if that situation arises. I believe it hasn't so far, and hopefully it won't, but who knows. That's actually all I wanted to say. So it's really if there's any further questions, but just to say, Michael Honeysett does have these slides, and I'm sure would be happy to share them.
Thank you very much. Is there any other questions or comments on that? Ben put something in the chat, but I don't know if.
Thanks, Chair. Councillor Hayes, just Catherine. So the legal challenge is due to be heard in March. Decision probably a few months after. So do we know of any members of staff where we'd find ourselves in a problem with this 95k cap, or is it not an issue for us yet, as far as we know?
Yeah, I was going to ask, actually, is there, what's one of our Hackney officers, what's likely to be the practical implications for Hackney? Which is similar to Ben's point, I think.
I mean, at the moment, we've got potentially one or two from the VR, from the legacy from the VR scheme, where we might have an issue to deal with, but we're actually talking to those individuals at the moment. In doing calculations going forward at the moment, we are heavily caveating them with the fact that all this uncertainty is around. But we haven't got any new ones that might fall into this at present. But obviously, the longer the uncertainty continues, the more of an issue this could potentially become.
So did I get you right in saying that we haven't got any live cases at the moment?
One or two.
We've got one or two outlying. Yep.
Okay then. So are there any other questions or comments on that? Or
I just had one comment. Michael Hartney, scheme representative.
Oh yeah, Michael, go ahead.
Pension board. It just seems to me that employees have got some very complex financial decisions to make in the future, maybe who aren't used to making such one-off life-changing financial decisions about which option to take.
Yeah, that's a good question. What support do we offer actually to people who are, potential people in this situation?
So in the past, when we've done, there's a number of things. When we've done VR schemes, etc., we've certainly run workshops to take people through the general process, etc. Obviously, we are going to look at the advice. Not the advice. We can't advise, but we can provide obviously details of options, etc. But people do need to take their own professional advice. But we will run, as if we have, for example, another VR scheme going forward, we'd certainly run workshops and set out the options around there. And we have people are always able to talk to the pensions admin team in-house to go through options. So we can provide details what those options are, but we can't actually advise in terms of what is best, and they need to take independent financial advice for that.
Chair, if I may, Chair, just to build on what Michael said, absolutely we can't give advice, but in the past we have held sort of financial planning sessions to assist scheme members who are coming up to retirement to get thinking about that, because and often what we've done is encourage people, not just on the cusp of reaching 60, but usually from around 50, isn't it, Michael? We've done the past.
I mean, we do hold pre-retirement workshops, and anyone could go on those regularly, where obviously sort of these problems are discussed, so they are highlighted to people that are even just thinking of retiring. They can go to those pre-retirement workshops.
Without wanting to prolong this item, so I know we've got a substantial agenda and people want to move on, I'm sure, but it's also, and I may have missed it in the presentation, so apologies, Catherine, but actually the cap is actually higher for other parts of the public sector as well, isn't it? I think I'm right in saying, isn't it the case that for the civil service it's near 135? So actually there's further inequities and disparities between what's actually proposed for the local government as opposed to other parts of the public sector. So I think that again is just worth making sure members are aware of it.
I'm not aware of that, I must say.
Well, I think when you look at the MHCRG consultation where they look to bring in, they look to talk about that £80,000 cap.
So you're talking there about the limit on how much pay can be used in calculating redundancy pay.
So there's further inequities in the system, but I'm mindful we've spent a long time on the site.
Of course, the unfunded scheme won't have the strain payments, will they? So there'll be more cap there. Okay, are we all right on that? There's some comments in the chat which I'll direct your attention to, but if we can move on, yes. Okay, thank you very much, Catherine. That was really, something else to worry about. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Obviously, it will be an issue going forward, but and it's interesting because. Yeah, well, I won't make comments about the legislation, but it's not always helpful, is it? No. Understatement. Oh, Henry's waving. Go on.
Sorry, Rob. I'm just thinking aloud. I didn't quite know what the figure should be, but it might be a good idea to think of some sort of manual system whereby if any member of staff with a salary of, I don't know, of excess 80,000 is leaving, just to make sure that the mathematics of any package is notified to the pensions board. It might just act as a second line of control to make sure that you don't make a mistake which you don't have to. I'm just thinking that's what I would be doing anyhow.
Well, there's a thought. I'll leave that with Ian perhaps to consider. Okay.
With Michael and team, yeah.
Right. Okay. So we can move to item 5, the Competition and Market Authority consultant assessment again objectives. As I said, I was trying to get away without a presentation on this one, but can I just first see if there's any? I'll assume it's understood and ask if there's any questions or comments from people present. No. Right. Just sort of, it's not easy when you haven't got a desk. So if I just go to the recommendations, then we're asked to note the assessment and approve a submission of the statement. I'll just say in passing that yeah, I mean, I think we all recognise you know, in the first time we've implemented this process, it was perhaps less than perfect. In you know, we had the sense of you know, there's setting and marking your own homework here, isn't there? But I think as we go forward into the next round of appointments in the future and setting up when we commission things, we need to introduce a little bit more independence into this process. Yeah. I'm looking at Ian.
Can I just chip in?
Yeah, Michael. Yeah.
Yeah, I had a quick discussion with Andrew from Hyman's earlier about this one, and that very fact actually. And as he pointed out to me, yes, they provided that template for us to use really as more for compliance than anything, and it should be seen as a living document for us that we can actually choose to take away and review those objectives if we feel they're not fit going forward at any time. So we don't necessarily need to wait until we go through the next round of procurement even.
Okay, that's helpful. So we should pick that up. I mean, we've got to do this now, haven't we? But
yeah.
Let's pick that up in the future, and so we're have got a slightly more I don't know what the word is, more formal process in the future.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we can talk about when we'll do that. So yeah, well, can we then agree that note the assessment and then approve the submission? Are we happy to do that?
Sorry, Chair, I had my hand up. Can I come in?
Yeah, you can. Sorry.
We are.
Oh yeah. If you use the app, that was helpful. Okay, thank you. Yeah.
I listened. I paid attention. You said.
Yeah, no. I'm sorry. My apologies. It's just you slipped on the bottom of the screen where I am looking. So I do apologise. Go on. Okay.
Just to check, I was keeping up on my electronic papers. We're item 5. Yeah, I'm not about to talk to the wrong item.
Yes, item 5.
Yeah. I was flicking through to open the right attachment. So these were, memory serves, so it was just over a year ago we set these, and they're the interim objectives. I remember at the time we had to do them under a tight deadline. We weren't entirely happy about that process because likewise it had to be done at that meeting or else, if you like. And it was just when we come back to looking at them again, I don't know, I just remember we looked at them at the time and said we sort of have to do this now to write up against a hard deadline, and now we're discussing this paper right up against a hard deadline, and just when we do have that fuller conversation on them, or did that take place during the year at a meeting I wasn't at, or?
No, we haven't really had a further conversation on the objectives since they were set at that interim stage. I think the Chair and I have discussed going forward that we do obviously need, and as Chair just said, we do need to review them going forward, definitely.
And introduce an element of independence in the way that well, so there is independent. We can decide what we want, but you know, a little bit more rigour into the way we do it in going forward.
So again, apologies, this is a bit clunkier when you're trying to flick between electronic papers and when you've a pack in front of you. Within the recommendations, do we need a deadline on that? As in when we'll do that piece of work, just so we don't have the same item this time next year? And we haven't looked at them?
Right. I was at some point. I've got all our consultants here, which makes it a little. At some point, we are, I think, due to have a sort of retendering process on the Michael. Yeah, aren't we?
We are at some stage.
So I don't. I'm not sure we can really go into a conversation with everyone present. But I'd suggested that as part of the process, when we consider the specification for that, we also consider this element and consider that process. Yeah.
With help of Chair, I can rephrase the question. When we agreed these as interim, what did we say was the timescale for which they could exist as interim? Because interim shouldn't be open-ended. It's either we just agreed them, whatever the term's going to be.
Yeah. Unfortunately,
they were on a fixed-term basis.
Unfortunately, I don't think we actually set a timescale on that. We did say that we'd effectively review them when we come to next round of procurement, etc.
And we've extended. Sorry, I can't apologise to all the consultants here. I shouldn't really have this conversation, but we've extended the contract for, Michael. How long was it we extended it to get through the investment strategy process?
Yeah, to get us through the investment strategy process, etc. Yeah.
So once we have signed off the investment strategy process, which is imminent, we can then. I mean, I don't. We'll have a report on time. Well, let's have a report on timetabling for all this in March. Yeah, so I'll just leave it there. Yeah, and then include the points that Councillor Edison's raised.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Rather than have a discussion now. Yeah.
No, that's absolutely fine. We didn't need a discussion now. I just didn't think we should have it as an interim item last year, 2019, and then talk about it again as interim today, and just not flag that at some point interim has to stop being interim.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Paul. I mean, as I said, I had in mind the commissioning process for when we do it again. So, but if we ask that we have an item in, we can deal with it just as members, timetable and this.
Yeah. Yep. Bring a brief paper to the next committee which sets out all the contracts and timescale for renewal,
including this issue.
Yeah.
Is that all right? Okay, thank you. So, having said that, thank you. That's very helpful. That. So can we, well, I think we did, but notes and approve, first note the assessment and approval solution. Yeah, good. Item 6, the over and underpayment GMP. This is quite substantial. So I'm going to ask Michael to introduce this? Yeah, talk through some of the issues here, because there's a big decision to make here.
Indeed. Okay. So basically, this paper sets out a couple of things. One is a general under and overpayment policy, which is talking about how we go about. So it's trying to set out a proper framework, ensuring that we treat people consistently in the recovery of under and overpayments. The recovery of overpayments and the payment of underpayments going forward. But it also talks about and gives an update on the GMP exercise that we've been given. Obviously, we've been updating committee through the quarterly update reports generally throughout the last couple of years while this exercise has been going on. And this sets out some of the details from that and asks for some recommendations around how we deal with particular elements of GMP in particular. Those basically the GMP exercise, the calculations have now been done, and within this paper, within the actual paper, there's a summary of the expected results in terms of number of people affected and values, and that's on. I can't say what page because it depends what document you're looking at, but it's paragraph 7.6 of the cover report. There's a summary of the details that have arisen from the GMP exercise. So if I just briefly go through the main points of that and the things that are being asked for in terms of the recommendations. So the top part of that shows the value of overpayments and underpayments.
Sorry, where are we? What page are we looking at?
Well, it's difficult for me to say what page because it's what document you're looking at, but it's paragraph 7.6 of the cover report.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's a separate paper. It's page 5 of the separate PDF of item 6 cover report.
Indeed, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, okay. So basically, the value of overpayments that have been made as a result of all the work that's gone on from GMP and the reconciliation for that is a total of £2.5 million. And in previous committees, it's not been agreed, but it's certainly been suggested by members that they wouldn't want us to go back and actually recover those sums. So what we're suggesting in this paper is that we write those sums off in terms of actual overpayments to date, but going forward, we ensure that the pensions payments are going forward are actually corrected. Now, whilst that seems like a huge sum in the cold light of day, just £2.5 million, obviously in terms of the pension fund itself, it's minimal, given the pension fund has assets of 1.6 billion. And we've taken advice from the actuary as to any impact that write-off might have on funding of the scheme. And their view is that it's minimal. And in fact, they've effectively taken account of that in the valuation that they've already done, because they haven't assumed that we would be recovering any money from GMP. So negligible impact, if any, on the funding side of thing, but it's just about not the morals, but I suppose the fact that we'd be going back to people and saying, can we have this money back off you? And in fact, they would have no idea of knowing that they've been overpaid because of the complexities of GMP. In the longer term, on the second table on that page, which shows changes in payroll, you can see that we're actually overall going forward, we'd actually be making a saving of over 200,000 per annum on the pension payroll. So over time, well, if you think of it in net present value terms, that £2.5 million soon is repaid in making the corrections to payments going forward. The tables then below just give some idea of the largest the types of thing we're talking about in terms of the increases and decreases, in terms of both value and the age of people. Now, what I would say is that the appendix, which is attached to this, Appendix 2, gives a lot more detail around this, and we're continuing to work with Equinity around some of the outliers. So you'll see there's an oldest overpayment case, someone aged 98. We're obviously being very careful that our calculations are right around that type of thing, being very certain we'll be very sensitive in how we approach that member in going forward, because obviously we then need to correct their actual pension rather than just, whilst we won't be recovering any overpayment if that's agreed, we do need to correct the pension going forward. So there is still work taking place on particularly on some of the outliers, which are not detailed in the appendix, but you can see where they are in Appendix 2. I'm not intending to go through Appendix 2 in any detail, but it's there if you have any questions.
Okay, thank you. Did one of our colleagues from Mayo wanted to say anything before I just open up for discussion on the GMP exercise? No, all right, okay.
I think I would just want to try and clarify a couple of recommendations as well, because whilst
do that before I ask questions, Ed. Go on.
Okay. Whilst they make perfect sense to me and people at Aon, because we've done the work, they might not read as they're read. So the first one, particularly around the GMP, is what I've already discussed about just ratifying the previous discussions at committee about overpayments to date being written off rather than collected, and that's particularly certainly relating to deceased pensioners. We wouldn't want to be going back to people's estates to recover overpayments. The next two recommendations around agreeing underpaid pensions for deceased pensioners will not be recalculated. This is really related to the first one. We don't want to reopen we'd have to reopen people's estates if we're going back to calculate their pensions and change them, and we really don't see the point of doing that. And then the one around dependents is that we will assume at the point that the dependents pension came into place, the actual pensioner who originally drew the pension, their pension, we won't be going back to correct that. Again, it's just taking account of any changes due to the dependents pension themselves. So just to try and add some clarity around those, really. The one around not making any adjustments to pensions where there's less change than less than £5 PA is really an admin one. It's to save on some administration, and it's £5 per annum. It's not seen to be that huge. To be honest, there aren't that many pensions that changes that fall within that category anyway. The thing around delegating points of detail, I know Chair in particular always comes back when we ask for delegation, is really about things like there will be individual cases, I've already said, where people come back to us and we need to be certain that we're correct, how we deal with them, etc. And we don't want to have to come back to committee every time to agree that approach, but obviously we would update committee on any delegations that have been used. And it's also around timing. We were hoping to get these changes made by March, to avoid the pensions increase, etc. But we recognise we need to give members, particularly where their pensions are being reduced, good notice of that. So we need to take a decision around the communications and the timing. So that's the type of thing that we're asking for delegation on. So just a bit of clarity around the recommendations.
Thank you very much. I'm mindful when looking at all this that although we've just been talking about the cap proposals for relatively higher paid staff, that most of our pensioners are not in receipt of large pensions. I think the average pension, it says somewhere in this report, is about £7,000 a year. which is is what most of our pensioners have to live on. So. I think we should be sensitive in moving forward on this. Okay, is there any questions or comments on this then? Is that Ben showing there or?
Yeah, that was me.
Yep.
Thanks, Michael. I'm in favour of the policy and what you're suggesting. Just one overarching point going forward. I mean, in terms of how these inaccuracies came about, what safety valves and audit processes have you put in place, or are we putting in place, to make sure they don't creep back into the system going forward, bearing in mind the overall sums that we're talking about? And we've had this debate quite a few times the last year about what the council contribution should be towards the pension fund, but obviously £2.5 million is quite a lot, and could possibly make that conversation put it into context. So I think a clear understanding of how this isn't going to happen again in the future. With respect to those where we are in point 2, with respect to those people who we are increasing their pension, are we backdating that? So we're not backdating those where we have overpaid, but for those that we have underpaid, are we backdating that? And thirdly, just to reinforce a point that I think you're already over, which is just the importance of giving people notice, comms, and making clear that we've made the decision for those where we had overpaid, we're not going to seek to claw it back. This means this much, but regrettably in the future, we will have to do this at some point.
Yeah. So,
Chair, is it all right if I come before Michael comes back? So I think my question relates to the first part of Ben's, so it's probably easier to take them together.
I was going to say, any other questions, take them all, yeah.
Sorry, Michael, to cut you off there, but you can probably do both in one go.
Yeah.
Mine was just to understand where the issue had arisen, because you set out in the paper that obviously the changes and move into the, whatever we're meant to call it now, new state pension or whatever it is, the scrapping of the second state pension and everything else. Did the issue arise because effectively the benchmarking we were using changed with the pension changes in 2016 is what I wanted to understand, because I can see the dates there for when people opted out, the commitment we made or the guarantee we had to make, So it's just to understand if that's why it was so significant, the benchmark itself changed, or if I've misinterpreted that. And then linked to that point around HMRC initially picking this up and then this being passed to us. And was this another thing of sort of central government, in this case, multiple central governments, I guess, over years, but creating a complexity and handing it over to us to resolve?
Okay. Right, I might, if I'm wrong here, Karen at all, can you just drop in on with me? So in terms of the first question around things creeping in again, so as set out in the paper, this has been an exercise that's been introduced because of the specific area around the GMP, the guaranteed minimum pension, and the change to the state pension, etc. And the fact that HMRC withdrew the ability to, they've basically set a deadline. You can't go back and review. If we didn't do this reconciliation now, and we had proven, and going forward, whatever the HMRC records said would have been taken as a fact. We would have had to pay the guaranteed minimum pension based on that, regardless of whether it was right or wrong, effectively. By us undertaking this reconciliation, we've actually gone through all the records, compared to HMRC, and actually made sure that it's our own records that are influenced and actually the correct ones, and making sure we've got the right figures in place for all the pensions going forward, etc. So there shouldn't be anywhere this creeping back in, because we've done that exercise and it's done and dusted in that respect. So picking up in the HMRC, I suppose, yes, you're right, they are effective. Well, because we've done this exercise, we felt it was right for the fund to do the exercise and make sure pensions were correct going forward, rather than taking the risk of accepting HMRC calculations of GMP, which could have cost the fund more. And I think we can see from some of the figures in here that quite possibly is the case, given they're having to write off overpayments. They would have continued to be made because we wouldn't have known about them going forward.
And sorry, Michael, just that question on benchmarking, has this all happened now because the new state pension changed the guaranteed minimum pension and therefore the benchmarking, so we had to do the whole process again to check we were honouring that commitment?
Effectively, yes. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Ben, have your questions been answered, do you think?
I think there was a question under and overpayments, which I haven't responded to, and forgive me, but I've forgotten what the detail of the question was. But yeah.
Well, it was.
You want me to pick it up, Michael? So I think the question was for the cases where the pension is increasing, and therefore it was underpaid historically. Are we paying the historical underpayments? And the answer is yes. And in addition, under the LGPS regulations, there is a requirement to pay interest on repayment of benefits. So in addition, the individuals will get base rate plus 1% for the period all the way back. So some of them will be quite long periods of underpayments.
So there's, on the table that I was referring to earlier, the underpayments of 173,000 will be, that's the back payment. There's interest to be applied to that of just over 17,000. There's 136 cases of that.
Can I just add one small point to what Mike said here, if that's okay? So the point about this was a reconciliation exercise to try to agree with HMRC, was their records correct, was our records correct, and then make sure we pull it on. So in a perfect world, you would say we have now completed that reconciliation exercise. But however, as part of the exercise, there was some cases where we just couldn't work out, was HMRC right or were we right? So there are some cases where assumptions have been made. So there's no 100% guarantee that there won't be a small number of cases that might come up. But to tell you the truth, looking at everyone here, it's more than likely that will happen for active scheme members when all of us are not actually here. And we really do think we've minimised that risk as much as possible. So I just don't want it to be minuted that it's a perfect reconciliation, because there is a small amount of risk and some assumptions made with it, but it's as good as it could be. And indeed, we're probably in a better place than a number of other pension funds.
Thank you. That's helpful. Yeah. Can I just, are all of these changes coming about as a result of the GMP exercise? And I'm conscious that we've had a number of reports on the GMP exercise over the last couple of years, haven't we? But or are there other issues in there that we're picking up?
So the things around the GMP, that particular part, it is due to the GMP exercise. What we're trying to do in Appendix 1, the rest of that is just introduce a formal policy going forward if we have cases where we have under or overpayments, just to make sure we've got something in place that officers can follow consistently.
That makes sense. Okay. Yeah, there's some interesting. Yeah, okay. Is there any other questions or comments on this?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask. I'm the third Michael Desmond, Vice Chair of the committee. I've heard of the 3 degrees. Well, we've got the 3 Michaels here. I wanted to know, because obviously when these calculations were made, the recipients, the pensions, didn't know about this. Do they know about it now? And if so, if we agree to absorb these overpayments, will they be relieved, or will they never know? And secondly, in comparison with other similar local authorities, it seems quite a lot to me. Is this magnitude greater or lesser than, say, Camden, Islington, or other similar authorities?
Well, Karen may be able to answer that. I don't know.
Yes, and apologies, I didn't introduce myself when I previously spoke. Karen McWilliams from Aon, Governance and Benefits Advisor. So in relation to the second question, we've worked with one other fund to the degree of detail that we're working with you, so I can only compare it to one other fund. I should actually point out that some funds have chosen not to do this exercise, but for the one other fund that I've been involved in at a detailed level, we did find that proportionately there was probably more cases here, but we consider that that's probably the case because of the historical administration that you have had before you went to Equiniti. We were aware of some records that perhaps were not fully complete or hadn't been analysed in the way we would expect them to be analysed when we took on records from the former administrator. So we suspect that is what drove some of the greater numbers of cases that needed to be rectified here. Okay. The second question in relation to the writing off of the overpayments. So we haven't yet finalised the letter to be sent to the people that will be affected by this. However, based on my experience with working with that other fund, they did have some very large reductions in pension, and the letter that they used, they didn't actually get any complaints at all, which I think is actually quite a positive thing. So the intention that we're looking at is at least to start with that as the starting point of the letter that we could use for your pensioners. And within that letter, it did say, it did stress the point that we are not reclaiming the overpayment that's been made to you, because we felt that helped balance. It's very difficult, but we felt it did help balance the bad news. I'm sorry, we're going to have to reduce your pension, but the slight positive is that we're not going to reclaim the overpayments made today. So
yeah, that's very, very important. I don't want pensioners to be stressed and distressed, particularly at this particular time, and this has to be handled with extreme sensitivity. So thank you, I'm reassured by that.
Thank you.
And to make the point I made at the beginning, that most of our pensioners are not wealthy.
Absolutely, yeah.
Muted myself. Okay. Can we then? Sorry. Any last questions or comments?
I raised my hand just as you looked away, Chair.
Well, I can only just see the top of your head on my screen.
I raised it virtually.
Anyway, Councillor Ellison, go on.
It was just, sorry, you've thrown me now. It was just in the recommendations, and again, I'm now in the wrong document, given the sensitivity of the communications, and if you look at some of those who are going to see a reduction, I think it gives in percentages, doesn't it, the overpayments, and that's presumably the reduction they're going to see, if I've got that right. And that's as high as 60% in one case, is it? Well, I realise those numbers can all be skewed if someone's on a low sum.
That's correct, Councillor Reynolds, that's right.
Yeah, and then obviously it doesn't necessarily, the figures don't necessarily cross over. The sort of 2K reduction could be of someone with a very large pension. The 60% decrease could be someone who's receiving a very small residual pension from us. And I just wonder if we want anything about in the recommendations about the communications being agreed in consultation with the chair, or whether we want any sort of threshold about those cases where we might want to see a more personalised approach taken due to the level of change in that person's pension payment.
If I may, Chair, this is where the graphs in Appendix 2, which is the separate document 16, which are quite useful because you start seeing the relationship. For example, it shows that actually the 98-year-old individual, their pension is reducing by about £125 a year. But there is a 95-year-old individual who's going to get a reduction of just under £2,500. So it does show the quite diverse range of cases. And as Michael has actually said, we have actually gone back to Equinity for those cases with the big amounts, and saying we really want double checks on those. We at Aon are going to do some assurance testing to make sure they're correct. I think it is good that we'll be considering those on an individual basis just to see, who are they, how old are they, how big a percentage reduction is it, and whether we actually try and think about a slightly alternate way and communicating it to make it as personal as possible.
And again, looking at those graphs, we don't have the exact crossover. You could have a very high reduction in monetary terms or large reduction in monetary terms, but you be on 90k because you've done this, that, and the other, and you've got a very high pension, and that's or you could lose half your pension, but that's because you're actually getting 2k residual from us or whatever. And I'm not saying that's not a huge sum; it's still a huge sum if you're on a low income. And it was just within that. I feel if we were talking about this in another sort of committee or other areas of the council, we'd want some sort of safeguard that those at the extremes either way, that there's some process where there might be further oversight. So maybe it's as simple as there's a communications plan which has to be agreed with the chairs. We know there's been that oversight of how those more sensitive communications are handled, and that the chair gets sight of that before it's rolled out, perhaps, if that works.
Yes, we can do that. We are working with quite tight timescales, so as long as the chairman doesn't mind having things fired up and very quickly. But yes, because we've obviously got the details that gives the percentage and the amount and the age, etc., all in one line at an individual level, so we can do that.
Because I'm aware we've got there in the document the point around discretion for cases where it might cause extreme hardship and things like that, but we've not set any parameters around that. And in other parts of the council, if we were looking at a policy like this, we probably would. And I appreciate the point on timing, so that I think, just some sort of backstop there with the chair to ensure there's that oversight would be appreciated.
Okay, I'm happy to do that. So are the officers okay with introducing that? Isn't it? I'll promise to deal with them in real time.
Yeah, no, fine.
Okay then. So, any other last questions or comments on that? Right. Can I just I'll ask you to agree with the recommendations. Can I just say that in relation to the delegations issue, I mean, we've just covered the point there that we'll buy some of these things past me in the first place. But I have asked that officers report back on how that delegation is used when it is used, and include an update in the section in the quarterly update at the very minimum to say the number of cases and amounts. Yep. Yeah. And obviously any issues that you need to bring to members' attention. Yeah. Okay. So if we can add that to those 2 points to the minute, that'd be much appreciated. Can we then agree those recommendations are set out in 2.1?
Agreed.
Excellent. Thank you very much. If we can move now to item 7, the quarterly update.
Sorry, Chair, can I just interrupt a moment just to say that I'm going to drop off the call now we've covered that item. I was just staying on to see if my assistance was needed there, so I'm going to love you and leave you all now. So
thank you very much, and thanks for
enjoy the rest of your meeting. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much, and thanks for your presentation earlier. That's really helpful.
No problem. Thank you. Bye.
See you again. Thank you. Okay, so we go to item 7, then the quarterly update reports. Can I just, I won't ask. I'll ask people are welcome to ask questions and have a discussion on this, but I won't ask for presentation. I was just going to say, in relation to the risk bit of it, especially if you were trying, I don't know, those of you who were trying to make sense of it when it came through in bits on a virtually, it was quite hard to follow. And there have been a number of quite complicated changes in this. So I have asked that we do a substantive item on the risk bit of it in March, which should also have asked to be circulated pretty early, so members have got a chance to raise points before the meeting as well as that. Because I think it's to untangle everything that's in there. Be quite. I do apologise. Polly Billington had her hand up. I've just flicked up and seen that. Is that?
It's okay. It was basically along the lines of what Rebecca asked, so I just lowered my hand.
Okay, I apologise for that, Polly. Apologies. Right, I'm picking up and down the screen. Okay, right. So just subject to that point, that we'll deal with risk again in a bit more structured way next month. Has anyone got any questions or comments on this? Okay.
Councillor Hayhurst has Councillor Chapman.
Yep.
Yeah.
Sorry, no, have I not raised?
No, sorry, I saw your hand up there. Sorry.
I can't put people's hands down, can I? No. Okay. Right. To take it as no, I'll just note that our funding levels are back up to 87.7% again. Well, it's September, wasn't it? Now, sorry.
Well, at the end of September, it was
so this we're doing another quarter behind, aren't we?
Yeah, I was intending to run it again today, and I'm sorry I totally forgot to, so I can't give you the updated figure. But yeah.
So someone from Hyams know.
I believe the funding level has improved a little during the course of the Q4, but I don't have the exact number off the top of my head either, I'm afraid.
It's interesting because well, we'll pick it up next time, but it's interesting that we are fairly substantially improved since.
I can run a report and just circulate it by email. Just a quick update.
That might be helpful, just to know what the current position is.
Yeah, no worries.
Okay, in that case, if there's no questions on that, can we note the report?
Noted.
Thank you very much, which then brings us to item 8, which is the annual report of the Pensions Committee. This is our own report to Council. Has anyone got any questions or comments on this?
No.
Can we note it?
Noted.
Excellent. Then item 9, then item 8. Hang on.
Yeah, on item 9.
We actually has a supplementary event agenda, haven't we?
No.
No? Okay.
You had so you got Appendix 1, which is the actual annual report of Pensions Committee, which you've just noted.
We've done the Pensions Committee annual report, and we've previously done our own annual report, haven't we? The actual report of the fund,
The annual
sorry.
report accounts. Yeah, they looked
last month.
in September. Yeah.
Yeah, and I understand they're formally approved by the Audit Committee rather than us, aren't they, or something, and then the Council.
They are, yeah.
Okay, then, so that brings us then to item 9, investment strategy, and we've got about an hour for this. So, who am I handing over to? Andrew?
If I just do a very quick introduction.
Sorry, Chair, can we exclude, can we just go?
Although it doesn't, my understanding is it doesn't affect anyone who's currently here, but we need to formally do that, don't we? Okay, Michael.
Okay, so basically.
Sorry, Michael, how do you say that?
Yeah, sorry. So this is the next stage of the investment strategy review, which is basically picking up from the workshop that we held back in, forgotten when it was now, September, October. It'd be November actually, when most members were there at that committee. So, sorry, at that workshop where most of the discussion was around asset allocation, and that's largely what this paper is around, although there are a couple of other issues that we want to pick up as well. From the workshop, there was particular discussion around hedging for foreign currency, and we said we'd come back with more detail and a bit more recommendation around that at this committee. And this appendix 2 and 3 will actually pick that up in the exempt section. There is also quite an important decision we're seeking in terms of the 5% allocation to renewables, and that's to the LSIV, Renewable Infrastructure Fund, that they're currently procuring managers for. We'll be providing some detail and hopefully get an in-principle decision. The reason we're looking for an in-principle decision at this meeting is that they're hoping to launch in March. And if agreed, then obviously it would be beneficial for us to be part of that first launch. And the next committee is too late to pick that up. So we'll pick that up in more detail in the exempt section of this report. So that's introduction on what we're going to do. But I think if I hand over to Andrew, and he'll take us through Appendix 1 first, and then we go exempt after that.
I work for Hymans Robertson as part of your investment consulting team. So just on this item, so before we move on to the new recommended changes to the investment strategy, which we'll be covering after this, we have an item with a recommendation relating to the implementation of a previously agreed piece of strategy advice from back in 2018. So just to be clear, this isn't a new piece of investment strategy advice, it's advice regarding the implementation of some advice that was previously agreed. So as some background, you'll recall back in 2018, the fund made a 10% allocation to 2 private lending mandates, which was to be funded from the equity holdings. So the nature of these private lending funds is that you make a commitment of a certain size. So in the fund's case, this was 160 million. And then the private lending fund managers gradually draw this investment down over time as they find opportunities to invest in. So you don't just give them all of the money up front straight away. You hold on to the commitment you've made until the fund managers are ready to invest it. So the way we currently manage this is that when the fund managers ask the fund for a chunk of the commitment, as they find investments, that money generally needs to be transferred to them fairly quickly. So we hold some of the committed money in a fund called the BlackRock Short Bond Fund, and that's because this fund holds very liquid assets that are easy to sell down very quickly to transfer to the manager in time. However, these investments in private lending mandates, they generally take a number of years for the manager to ask for all of your commitments. So you don't want to just move the whole 10% allocation out of equity straight away into the short bond fund, because you'll miss the equity returns there. So it's more efficient to kind of do it bit by bit and do it in chunks. So an initial 5% of fund assets was taken from equities back when the commitment was made and moved into the BlackRock Short Bond Fund. And then this has gradually been drawn down by the private lending managers over time. So we're now recommending that the next chunk of equities are transferred to the BlackRock Short Bond Fund to the tune of 3% of fund assets. And this would be from the BlackRock World Equity Fund. So the recommendation here is to continue the process of funding the private lending mandates by transferring 3% of fund assets from the BlackRock World Equity Fund to the BlackRock Short Bond Fund.
Do you want to deal with that now? Yeah, okay. We've got is that investment effectively already in that fund? Is it temporarily? I've just tried to
Yeah, so
yeah,
sorry, I should have introduced myself earlier. Andrew Johnston, I'm the investment consultant for Hackney Pension Fund and also from Hymans Robertson. So yes, the agreement in 2018 was to move 10% of assets from equities to private lending.
Yeah.
Phase one, i.e. minus 5% out of equities into private lending, has gradually taken place over the past 12 months. This is phase two, to redeem a further 3% from equities, hold it in cash, ending investment in private lending, which will take place over the next 6 to 12 months. And at which point, phase three, the final 2% of the reduction in equities to fund the private lending commitment, will come back to the committee to essentially keep you up to date of the progress on that the implementation, which was expected to take 2 or 3 years. And it is taking, is essentially that process is in chain. So this is, yeah, exactly that, Rob. It's really to take, Chair, excuse me, to take a further 3% out of equity.
That's all right.
A further 3% out of equities, and to hold it in the short-dated bond fund pending investment in private lending, as previously agreed by the committee. But it's really coming back to committee to say this is stage two. It's exactly what we said we were planned to do. No change, but just to get your approval to continue as planned, basically.
I'm looking at a table in one of your reports, but I've just realised it's probably in one of the exempt bits. So anyway, yeah, okay. Do members understand that, and are there any questions or comments on it? There's something in the chat here. No.
Chair, hello, it's Jonathan, scheme member representative.
Okay.
Yeah, I've got a question. Before we approve phase two, can we have some performance detail about phase one, please?
Sure.
Just a question. That's a good question, but is that a question particularly in relation to this recommendation, which we're looking at now, which is the last?
Chair, I guess my point is we're switching out of a BlackRock equity fund into their short bond fund. Equity markets have been volatile. I appreciate that. But there's also the potential for return. I'd appreciate knowing a little bit more about what has happened with regard to the phase one money and the sort of performance that we've had on it before saying yes to phase two, please.
Okay, we're still talking about phase one with this recommendation, basically. But Andrew, yeah, go on, you.
I will absolutely answer the question in relation to performance to date. I think the key point also perhaps to make is that the commitment has been made. So the full commitment has been made, and therefore this is almost the implementation process. So there's not a subsequent sort of decision to make in relation to whether or not we do or do not commit further capital to the private lending mandate. It's just a question of where we fund it from and when we actually fund it. But to answer your question on the private lending mandates and the performance of them thus far, it has been a challenging period for credit markets in general. Probably the most important part, as we mentioned, whenever it came to making a strategic commitment to private lending a few years ago, was that really what you want to do is avoid defaults, make sure you get paid your income, and you get your capital back at the end of the lending period. To date, there have been no defaults within the two mandates, and the income has generally been received, albeit there's been a little bit of deferral in some of that, but there's nothing to be alarmed about on that, to the extent that it's credit market challenges which have been happening as a result of the recent pandemic. So I think those mandates have been functioning as we would expect, and we'll bring anything else to your attention. In terms of how the equity mandates have performed, I think the mandates have performed very well. We would still recommend that the planned reduction of equity mandates to fund these, the more predictable income streams that you would expect to generate from the private lending mandates, is the right source of funding. But equity, retaining that 5% allocation in equity for the last 12 months has proven to be a good decision. And as I say, the commitment to the funds has been made, so we're not actually looking to make any additional commitment. It's just seeing through the commitments that we've already made.
Okay, does that answer your question, Jonathan? For now.
Yes, thanks so much, Andrew.
Okay, Henry, have you got your hand up, or is that from the last question?
Yes, please. I just wanted to sort of slightly share Jonathan's concerns. I think we obviously have committed this money anyhow, but I'm sort of not totally convinced by the private lending decision. But I think it's not for now. But it would be good, as he's asked for it, to have some sort of review of that performance in a bit more detail at a later meeting. I don't know if we're fully committed to draw the equities down, but I'm still looking, as you said at the start, at a funding of 87% in the fund as a whole. It still seems to me that we should be going for a bit more growth if we can do. So the decision's been made, but I do think we ought to have a proper look at the performance of the private lending mandate somewhere not too long down the line. Thank you.
Sure. Happy to do that, and we'll come back to perhaps debate some of your points on the growth allocation in a moment.
Okay, so if we're happy with that, can we? I mean, they're not numbered, the recommendations, but that's the first bullet point, isn't it? Which is just tidying up really from the last set of investment strategies. Are we happy to agree with that? Yeah, everyone's nodding. Okay, so that's dealt with the first bullet point. Right.
Michael, I see your hand up. Sorry.
Yes, it's more of a question for the chair. As I'm not a member of the committee, I just wanted to check, should I leave before you get to the exempt items?
I'm happy for you to stay. You'd be able to see them as a member of the board if they were on the board agenda. Unless Rabia wants to contradict me there, I'm happy for you to stay.
No, that's correct. You can remain at the meeting.
Yeah, thank you. You're very welcome. Okay, so then back to Andrew now, isn't it? Or is it, well, whoever, back to Hymans.
It is Andrew, but we need to go exempt now.
Okay, can we exclude the press and public?